if you had known me 8, 9, 10 years ago, you would have experienced a very different Rob. I was doing good work, and I had a good job. I don't know what good job means, but I had a job. I had friends, some friends. I had enough friends, I think, at the time, and I had purpose. But there was something else. There was a heaviness that I couldn't quite escape, and I didn't fully understand. And you might have experienced it if you know me as a discontent in your friend Rob. I had a lot of people. I'm not sure that's the word they would use, but there were different words that people would say when they would meet with me. Like it was almost like something else was going on that they didn't understand. I don't think I fully understood as well. And it wasn't like a 45-pound weight on my shoulder. It wasn't like that, but it was more like a 5 to 10-pound weight that lasted, quite frankly, for years, a long, long time. And I would say that the Rob you see today is different. And the weight that I feel today is no longer about discontent or that kind of this thing I didn't fully understand, but sometimes about the community of leaders and people with whom I am on mission together, which is many, many, many of you. And so I feel a different kind of weight today. And I realize now in many ways that weight that I felt was a time of preparation that I didn't fully understand. In many ways, I felt like I was being prepared for 25 years for this moment. And it wasn't like what I was doing wasn't important. But that's a long time. It's a long time to have felt that getting ready, that I would not have described it as getting ready. I didn't really understand it that way. And I just have a question is, how would you describe the weight or heaviness that you feel today or have felt in the past? Even preparing for this conversation this week, it's been a little tough. I have to admit, like the topic of remaining determined with a heavy heart, like where do you begin? And just some of the examples I know that I've heard from some of you and other friends of mine is that some of you, your leader left. So there was a leader in whom you had a lot of faith who left. Maybe you've been on a path toward a mission for years that's taken you longer than you thought. And it's causing you to question what you were even doing in the first place. Maybe you have a job that is not working itself out. You haven't been able to get clarity, or you felt isolated and without team support, or maybe you love the mission or you don't love the mission, but you're not sure how to make your job better. Maybe some of you just got laid off, and how do you stay determined? What are you determined about now? Some of you are feeling financial pressures, probably. Those things are on you. You want direction, but it's not coming. You need that direction. You chose to leave your career that you were building. And maybe you got blamed, or someone else around you got blamed for something that happened. These are just some of the real stories I hear. And what does it look like to remain determined then? You've been in a marriage for years. Let's get honest. You've been in a marriage for years where nothing changes. And you made a choice to love this other person, and it's been hard on you, maybe on them. And you may feel like there are a few others who can help you make sense of it. And I'm not saying you have a bad marriage. I'm just saying, like, this is some of the realities, is like some of the pieces and the working pieces of our lives, the realness of that. You're a business owner. Any person with a family member dealing with illness, and you must remain determined. Some of you may have even lost or are about to lose a loved one. I did just a few weeks ago. Some of you know that. So these are some of the things that weigh heavy. I don't want to be all heavy, but like, it's life, right? It's in front of us. So here we go. That's the intro. I'm Dr. Rob McKenna, and welcome to the WiLD Conversation, where we make the best thinking in psychology, leadership, and organizational science accessible to leaders who are willing to learn and edit for their sake and for the sake of others. And today we're continuing our series on we called it "What Are Executives Really Talking About?" And one thing that they're talking about, I don't think you have to be an executive to understand this, is how do you remaining determined with a heavy heart. So y'all know that I like to deconstruct words. I just like to talk about what do words really mean. And so this word determination is fascinating to me. To be determined, by the way, is about having made a firm decision and being resolved not to change it. Like, listen to that. To be determined is about having made a firm decision and being resolved not to change it. Having made a decision firmly and being resolved to stay that course. In other words, this is what I decided, and I'm not going to change my mind. How do I do that if my heart is heavy And what might my heart be telling me? It's kind of an interesting way to think about this. There is a determination and weight on the mission of our lives. And at the same time, we feel, while the mission may be amazing, we do feel a weight sometimes, a personal or professional weight. And there's a lot that's happening, and you may want to give up some days, but you know that you can't, because many of you, from a leadership perspective, are responsible for the weights of other people. And so it's not an option. It doesn't feel like an option to give up and to lose that determination, but you have heaviness. And we just get real. This isn't like the 3 ideal ways to lead. Like this is the reality of life. And that's what WiLD is about. If we're going to talk about it, have a whole conversation, we're going to get real. And so let's talk a moment about a heavy heart. What does that mean? What does it mean to remain determined with a heavy heart? A weight, I would describe it this way: a weight we can't escape, at least not in the short run. A feeling of heaviness that manifests itself oftentimes in our bodies. We feel it emotionally, and it weighs on us. And so, to make this real, and I promise you, I'm going to leave us with hope. That's my, I promise you that. So I don't want you to just bury yourself and like, yeah, Rob, this was a great conversation. Glad I jumped into that. All I thought about is how much weight there is in my life. But I want you to take just a moment. Would you take a moment, just maybe 30 seconds? I'll give you 20 seconds. All right. And write this down. What is it that is weighing heavy on your heart that is related to something you decided to do? Or I would say maybe, or are trying to decide what to do. In other words, what is a situation that is either causing you to have to make a firm decision, or is based on a decision you made that is causing some degree of weight for you? Will you get out a piece of paper and just make a note? This next part of the content, I think, will be more rich if I give you a moment to think about this. So take a moment, write that down. Most people don't have 20 seconds of silence in a podcast. For those who listen to this later, it's going to be kind of interesting, right? So let's go. So a few years back, we started to do research on something called leading under pressure. And what we found was that leaders had different ways of responding to pressure. And some focused most of their attention on what was important to them, and others focused more of their attention on what was important to everyone else. And the reason why I bring that up is I had a working hypothesis that I never got to study. And my hypothesis was this, that those who with a lower level of emotional self-regulation, so in other words, an ability to kind of manage their emotions, and especially those on top of that, another variable, who care deeply about what other people are experiencing, they have high degree of empathy, have more back problems. I never got to test it, but my hypothesis was that emotional weight manifests itself physically in our backs, because our backs are the fundamental structure that holds us up, without which we can't stand. And as a person who's had 2 back surgeries, this is very personal. So I had a 2-level fusion, so my back is artificially held up. And so I think I related to this, but I always ask people when they take the leading under pressure inventory, if they rate certain ways, if they have back problems. And sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes I'm right. But I just want to put that out there, that heaviness of heart can manifest itself physically. And what we also found was is that pressure we feel has different faces. And sometimes, I think this relates to the idea of a heavy heart, because sometimes we face interpersonal pressure and heaviness. So it's between us and someone else. Sometimes we face it intrapersonally. In other words, it's something that's going on within us that may or may not, other people may not be aware of. And sometimes there's environmental pressure or a weight that it has different faces. Those are 3 of the different faces. And as you consider the weight you feel today, and whatever it is that you wrote down related to that decision you made or must make, I would maybe think about that as what type of pressure are you feeling? Are you feeling a weight that's because of something between you and someone else, something within you, or something that's purely situational? Would be a way to think about that, to just begin to assess and maybe write that down. Which way does it feel for you? And here's why I bring that up. Why is it important for us to assess the heaviness we feel? I think it's important because of this. And this is the leader development part of this. Without assessment of specific intent in our situation, we start to play leadership or life hyperbole, where we feel that heaviness impacting everything without stepping back and understanding why it's there in the first place and where it's coming from. Do you hear me? It's like we start, I just, that idea of hyperbole, which I kind of can't stand when I do it myself, but it's like just saying you always, or I never, or everything is about, it's just this big ambiguous weight that's sitting on top of me without understanding where it's coming from. And so I think assessment is a key part of that. And it is really difficult to motivate into a future if you can't step back and see what's actually happening. It's really, really difficult to do that. And here's the double-edged sword of determination, is that it is about resolve, like I said at the beginning, a firmness and almost like you could think of it like this, a lack of elasticity or even willingness to change that decision. And that is sometimes a good thing. I think oftentimes in culture, we're told it's the only thing, like do whatever you want, stay true to that thing you decided, do that thing. And it's like, that's half of the picture, right? Like, because at other times, I think it can be detrimental, it can be a problem for us and for other people. And so it causes you to think like, what might a heavy heart be telling us? It might be giving us insight into something that matters to us that needs more attention. I don't know why I wrote this down. An aging parent who needs us to be more attentive to them. A team member that matters to us because we're responsible for their finances because payroll is ours to provide. A business that is struggling and we become aware of how much we have invested in this business. But I would say this, a heavy heart doesn't only tell us what matters to us, for better or for worse, it also tells us what we value. And it can provide a moment to evaluate what really matters and what we need to let go. And I would say, finally, this is also a heavy heart can offer us a choice to see something we haven't seen before, a new way of being, a new hope for the future, and new things we value. And so I'm gonna do this. Like, where do we start, Rob? So that's a lot of framing. What are we gonna do? So some of you love this. Some of you are like, not again. I'm giving you my top 10 list. All right. I'm giving you my top 10 list. I know there are a few of you who are like just really excited right now. Some of you are like, oh, brother. So don't count. What I do when people give top 10 lists, I start to count, where are we in the list? But some of you are like me, where you're obsessive about counting. Try to let that go. Okay, here we go. Number 1, here are some things to do that I thought about that I have thought about practicing myself this week. The first one is this. And I'm not going to get into the research behind this, but there is some good research behind this. Assess the reality of the situation. That's number 1. What's really happening? Evaluate your internal narrative. What is really happening? One of the questions on one of the wild cards we often ask people is, listen to this, it's crazy. What is the repeating narrative in the back of your mind that promises to limit you today? It's like just taking an assessment of the narrative that's going on. Now, this is interesting too, though. Is that sometimes it could be limiting you in a good way or a destructive way. So I want to be careful to say that whatever narrative is going on in you is bad, because the narrative that's against what you're doing might actually tell you something. But it also might be limiting you. I think there's that possibility. But I think the first point is to assess the reality of the situation. That's why I even gave you what kind of pressure are you facing right now? Number 2, think like an entrepreneur, but don't necessarily be one. You don't all have to be entrepreneurs to do this, but I love how some of the research on entrepreneurial thinking, it's really about focusing on potential, which is more deeply grounded in hope. It's maintaining a perspective on what it is that could emerge from a situation that, quite frankly, feels pretty bad. Because we know that good things do emerge from really difficult times and barriers in our lives. And so if we step back to say, what potential might be here that I can't quite see yet? And it's hard. Like I said, in those 25 years, I couldn't name it yet, but I think that's the next one and entrepreneurs tend to think that way. Number 3, identify, this will not surprise some of you coming from me, identify your real and excavated purpose. I say excavated because purpose is not something that is typically there right on the surface. it takes some digging. Some of you that have been annoyed as my friends have heard me say, why are you here? And then when you answer the question, I say, why are you here? And then you answer the question again, and I say, why are you here? And it's not to be a provocateur, but to get more deeply at what is the real purpose? And maybe it's a purpose you don't even understand yet. And I think dealing with some of the heaviness if we think about that determination related to heaviness, it can be helpful. Okay, here's some other things. Number 4, avoid future decisions based on sunk costs. You know what I mean? You think about determination and the world tells you, keep doing it. And you're like, oh, sometimes you need to stop doing it. Determination is a blessing and can be a curse. Avoid the pressure to remain determined to the same thing. In other words, to stick to your guns of your decisions simply because you made a decision. I think sometimes there's a time to cut bait. And that, by the way, I am an angler, and when you cut bait, I don't know if that's actually where that came from, but I'm assuming it did. It's painful to let a lure go in the lake. I'm just saying, like they're not cheap, and especially my favorite lures. So, but sometimes it's time to do that and not try to drive the boat back to get that thing unhooked from a log. Okay, number 5, see it through a long haul lens. I already gave my example of this. Sometimes heaviness takes time and patience. I think for some of us to step back and to realize that that's what's going on, it can be real. That's what I wish someone had said to me, is like, you're in a moment of preparation, which someone could have said, that could have talked to me about that. And there probably were people who did. Number 6, do the hard thinking. Without the hard thinking, it's hard to evaluate anything. Heaviness can cause us to get intentionally lazy. You know what I mean? It can cause us to get intentionally lazy, and think on it and trust that great new decisions or resolve can come from active reflection. What do those moments look like for you? Number 7, this is one of my favorites. For those of you leading a team, don't mistake momentary lapses in motivation as a lack of long-term commitment. So those of you managing your team or your family will go through seasons of days, weeks, and months of heaviness. And as an add-on to that, don't mistake the heaviness you feel for a heaviness that everyone else feels. You know what I'm saying? Is like sometimes we assume that it's like team hyperbole, right? It's like maybe other people are doing fine, but I think that don't mistake momentary lapses in motivation as a lack of long-term commitment. I think we need to be really respectful and just see people what they're actually experiencing. Number 8, prepare for the hard conversations. We did a whole series on this, y'all. So if you want to look on, we have podcasts out there. It's on our YouTube channel on how to have tough but important conversations. Because number 9 is this. If number 8 is prepare for the hard conversations, then number 9 is have the hard conversations. You know what I mean? Like it matters. That preparation for those things matters, but having the hard conversations will oftentimes provide a new level of determination, or a new determination that will actually change the heaviness that you feel. And then number 10, here is my shameless plug. I'm sorry, people, I can't help it. Use the WiLD toolkit. If you are someone who has access to it, or some kind of an intentional process for development, remaining determined requires a systematic assessment of your current developmental reality and understanding the long-term developmental reality of those around you. Weights on us are not just about one thing. They are about many things. My personality tells me a bit about the way I will likely process things for the rest of my life. Understanding my organizational life context helped me to see my situation for what it is and not just what it feels like. Understanding my purpose gives me a frame to evaluate my determination. Knowing what I'm good at tells me a bit about the things I can control out of my competence as opposed to my fear. Getting intentional about my next experience provides hope for me and for others. Seeing my investment in others makes it less about me, just about me, and about me with them. And getting strategically surrounded provides the necessary support and development I need to become a better version of myself and not just stand there holding the weight. So I say that to say an intentional process, that it's heaviness, it has things that help it be lighter, and intention can help do that. So these 10 things are all expressions of what I call, I use ridiculous words sometimes, activated cognitive intent. Doing something, thinking differently, and then with intent. seeing it all and doing it differently, or remaining determined on purpose. And I'll finish with this. Sometimes that heaviness we feel isn't something to resolve, but to hear, to feel, and to trust that it's telling us something about what's important to us. And these 10 steps, these 10 things are important to me, but you may be in a season where you, quite frankly, just need a friend, a listening ear, a vacation, a new job, or a new perspective. And so I hope that provides some hope and some structure for some things to think about as we just now continue the conversation. So let's go.